I'm Natalie, 34 years old, and I committed the unforgivable sin of marrying before my golden child sister. Standing at the altar that day, I couldn't help but stare at those empty front row seats where my parents should have been. My whole life, I'd been second best to Rebecca, the family's crown jewel. Everything had to revolve around her timeline, her achievements, her perfection. But now, 2 years later, their carefully curated image of the perfect family is finally crumbling apart. Before I dive into how my parents' perfect family facade finally crumbled, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below, and hit that subscribe button if family drama stories resonate with you. Growing up in our pristine colonial home in suburban Boston meant keeping up appearances at all costs. My father, Richard, was a founding partner at a prestigious law firm, while my mother, Linda, maintained her status as the neighborhood's most impeccable socialite. Every shrub was perfectly trimmed, every dinner party flawlessly executed, and every child had to represent the family name with distinction. That is, until I came along. My sister Rebecca was 4 years older and embodied everything our parents valued. She had straight blonde hair that never seemed to frizz like mine, perfect posture that made my perpetual slouch more noticeable, and an academic record that made teachers swoon. I remember sitting through countless dinner parties where my parents would showcase Rebecca's latest achievements while I silently pushed food around my plate. "Rebecca just made valedictorian," my mother would announce to dinner guests, her voice dripping with pride. Then, almost as an afterthought, she'd add, "Natalie's doing well in her art class." The dismissive tone wasn't lost on anyone, least of all me. When Rebecca got accepted to Princeton with a partial scholarship, my parents threw an extravagant party that cost more than my entire senior year budget. Local newspaper reporters were invited, photographs were taken beside an ice sculpture of the Princeton Tiger, and my father gave a speech that brought tears to the eyes of everyone except me. I stood in the corner, 16 years old, and already knowing that whatever accomplishments I might achieve would never measure up. My bedroom told the story of our family dynamics perfectly. Rebecca's room was a shrine to achievement. Trophies, medals, and framed certificates covered every surface. My room, down the hall and significantly smaller, held art supplies my aunt had gifted me against my mother's wishes. "Art is a hobby, Natalie, not a career path," she'd remind me regularly. During my junior year, I won a regional art competition that came with a small scholarship. When I showed my father the certificate, he glanced at it briefly before asking if I'd finished studying for my SATs. "That's nice, honey, but colleges care about academics, not doodles," he said, effectively crushing any pride I'd felt. Family vacations were particularly telling. We'd visit museums where my parents would guide Rebecca through the historical exhibits, discussing political implications and cultural significance, while I'd wander to the modern art section alone. Once, I overheard my father tell a colleague on the phone, "Yes, 2 daughters. Rebecca's the one with the bright future." Despite the constant comparisons, I developed a quiet resilience. My sketchbooks became my sanctuary, filled with colorful drawings that expressed everything I couldn't say aloud. When I was 17, my art teacher, Mrs. Josephine Fleming, pulled me aside after class. "Your work has something special, Natalie, authentic emotion. Don't let anyone dim that light." Those words sustained me through high school, where I existed in Rebecca's academic shadow. Teachers would often greet me with, "Oh, you're Rebecca's sister," their faces showing subtle disappointment when my test scores didn't match hers. I developed my own group of artistic friends who appreciated my quirky sense of humor and creative outlook, creating a small world where I wasn't just Rebecca's sister. College was my first taste of real freedom. I chose Syracuse University, partly because their art program had offered me a decent scholarship, but mostly because it was 6 hours away from home and Rebecca had gone to Princeton. For the first time, no one compared me to my perfect sister. Those 4 years were transformative. I excelled in my classes, developed my own artistic style, and even had a gallery showing in my senior year. My roommate Allison became the sister I'd always wanted, supportive, kind, and genuinely interested in my thoughts and feelings. When my parents attended my graduation, their lukewarm congratulations couldn't diminish my sense of accomplishment. "It's not Princeton," my father remarked when touring the campus, "but I suppose it served its purpose." After graduation, despite my internal resistance, I moved back to the Boston area. The gravitational pull of family expectations was strong, and part of me still desperately wanted their approval. I found a job teaching art at a local community center while doing freelance graphic design work on the side. My mother called it my little job whenever she mentioned it to friends, always following up with updates about Rebecca's rising career at a prestigious consulting firm. Sunday dinners became a weekly exercise in restraint. Rebecca would arrive looking immaculate in designer clothes, talking about client meetings in exotic locations, while I'd sit quietly listening to my mother's subtle digs about my appearance or career choices. "Honey, have you thought about doing something with your hair? First impressions matter in the real world," she'd say, or "The Thompson's daughter just got promoted at her law firm. They're so proud." Despite the constant undercurrent of disapproval, I maintained the facade of family harmony. I'd show up to family functions, smile in photographs, and play my assigned role. Deep down, though, I was building emotional walls brick by brick, protecting myself from the pain of never being enough. What I didn't realize was that these same walls were creating space for something wonderful to enter my life, someone who would see me for who I truly was, not who my family wanted me to be. I met Jason Montgomery on a rainy Tuesday evening in April. I was teaching an introductory painting class at the community center, and he arrived late, soaking wet and apologizing profusely. He'd signed up on a whim, he explained, wanting to try something new after his divorce was finalized. There was something immediately disarming about his genuine smile and the way he laughed at himself as he struggled with basic brush techniques. "I think I'm creating an entirely new art form here," he joked, holding up a canvas where the colors had blended into an unrecognizable brown mess. "Maybe we could call it abstract confusion?" Unlike the polished, achievement-focused men my parents approved of, Jason was refreshingly authentic. He worked as an environmental engineer, designing water purification systems for developing countries. His passion for his work wasn't tied to prestige or money, but to making a tangible difference. After class, we found ourselves lingering in conversation, and he asked if I'd like to grab coffee. That coffee turned into dinner, which turned into weekly dates exploring Boston's hidden gems. Jason came from a middle-class family in Vermont, his father a high school teacher, his mother a nurse. The first time he described a family dinner at his parents' modest farmhouse, I was struck by how different it sounded from my experiences. "My mom makes this incredible apple pie, and we all argue over who gets the last piece," he told me, his eyes crinkling with genuine affection. "Dad always lets Mom win, even though everyone knows it's his favorite." When Jason finally met my family at a dinner party 3 months into our relationship, the contrast couldn't have been more stark. My mother greeted him with a tight smile and immediately mentioned Rebecca's boyfriend Thomas, a surgeon from a prominent Boston family. Throughout dinner, my father interrogated Jason about his career prospects, while my mother made thinly veiled comments about his casual attire. After dessert, Rebecca cornered me in the kitchen. "He seems nice, Natalie," she said, with that familiar condescending tone. "Very suitable for you." The implication was clear. Jason might be good enough for me, but he wouldn't meet their standards for their golden child. What my family couldn't understand was how Jason made me feel. For the first time, I was with someone who valued my creativity, who asked questions about my art, and actually listened to the answers. When I showed him my studio space, cramped in the corner of my apartment, he spent hours looking at each piece, asking thoughtful questions about my inspiration and techniques. "You see the world differently," he told me one evening as we walked along the Charles River. "It's like you notice beauty in places everyone else just passes by." Our relationship wasn't without challenges. Years of family conditioning had left me with deep-seated insecurities. The first time Jason complimented my appearance, I instinctively looked for the hidden criticism. When he expressed pride in my artwork, I minimized my achievements. Recognizing these patterns, Jason gently but persistently challenged them. "Your family's opinion isn't the only one that matters," he reminded me after a particularly difficult Sunday dinner where my mother had spent the evening praising Rebecca's recent promotion. "And from where I'm standing, "You're pretty extraordinary." After 6 months together, I invited Jason to a gallery opening where two of my pieces were being displayed. My parents had declined to attend, citing a charity gala they couldn't miss. Throughout the evening, I watched as Jason engaged with other artists, proudly introducing me and my work to everyone he met. When a local arts magazine reporter asked to take my photo beside my painting, Jason stepped aside, knowing this was my moment. Later that night, he held the magazine clipping featuring my interview and said, "This is going in a frame in our future home." The first of many. As our relationship deepened, Jason became increasingly protective of me during family gatherings. When my father dismissed my recent commission for a local restaurant mural, Jason calmly interjected, "Actually, public art like Natalie's has been shown to increase community engagement and property values. Her work isn't just beautiful, it's valuable." The subtle shift in my father's expression, surprise mixed with reluctant respect, was something I'd never forget. After 2 years together, Jason planned a weekend hiking trip to the White Mountains in New Hampshire. Despite my mother's disapproval, "Outdoor activities are so rough on your complexion, dear," I eagerly packed my hiking boots and warmest jacket. On our second day, after reaching a summit overlooking a spectacular valley painted in autumn colors, Jason dropped to one knee. "Natalie Bennett," he said, pulling out a simple but elegant emerald ring that he later told me had belonged to his grandmother. "You've taught me to see beauty everywhere. Would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" Tears streaming down my face, I said yes, without hesitation. The joy of that moment, standing on a mountaintop with the man who loved me exactly as I was, felt like a rebirth. My happiness was short-lived. When we returned to Boston, I arranged a dinner at my parents' house to share our news. I'd spent hours preparing myself for their reaction, rehearsing responses to potential criticisms. What I hadn't prepared for was their utter lack of enthusiasm. "Engaged," my mother repeated after our announcement, her voice flat. "But what about Rebecca and Thomas?" My father cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Don't you think you're rushing things a bit, Natalie? After all, Rebecca and Thomas have been together longer, and there's a certain order to these things." Rebecca, to her credit, offered congratulations that seemed genuine, though Thomas merely raised his glass in a half-hearted toast. The remainder of the dinner passed in excruciating discomfort, with my mother asking pointed questions about wedding dates and venues that felt more like an interrogation than interest. In the car afterward, Jason took my hand as I fought back tears. "They'll come around," he assured me, though we both heard the uncertainty in his voice. "And if they don't, we'll create our own happiness." That night, lying awake beside Jason, I realized we were at a crossroads. I could continue seeking approval I might never receive, or I could choose the love and acceptance that was being freely offered to me. For the first time in my life, the choice felt clear. The initial wedding planning phase began with cautious optimism. Despite their lukewarm reaction to our engagement, I hoped my parents would eventually embrace Jason and our future together. I scheduled a lunch with my mother to discuss preliminary ideas, bringing along bridal magazines and a notebook filled with thoughts about venues, colors, and potential dates. "We were thinking about next June," I explained as we sat at her favorite bistro. "Early summer, so we could have an outdoor ceremony at Lakeside Gardens." Mother stirred her tea methodically, her expression carefully neutral. "June is only 8 months away, Natalie. Proper weddings take at least 18 months to plan. And Lakeside Gardens? It's so common. The Bradshaw family held their daughter's reception there last year, and she married that plumber." She pronounced plumber as if describing a particularly virulent disease. "Jason, and I don't want to wait that long," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "And Lakeside is beautiful, affordable, and has meaning for us. We had our third date there." "Sentimental choices rarely make for elegant events," she countered. "You should consider the Westbrook Club. They have an excellent reputation, and your father's firm has connections there." What followed was 2 months of subtle manipulation. Mother would send helpful suggestions that invariably involved more expensive options, longer timelines, and changes that would better suit her vision rather than ours. When I selected a simple, bohemian-style dress from a boutique in Cambridge, she arranged a surprise appointment at an exclusive salon in Boston. Just a look, she insisted. No harm in exploring options. The dresses she selected were ornate, traditional, and came with price tags that made me physically uncomfortable. When I emerged from the dressing room in a heavily beaded gown that restricted my breathing, her eyes lit up for the first time since my engagement. "Now that looks like a proper bride," she declared. "Rebecca would look stunning in something similar when her time comes." And there it was, the constant comparison, the implication that Rebecca's eventual wedding would be the real event worth celebrating. I declined the dress, citing the cost, though the truth was I couldn't bear to walk down the aisle feeling like an imposter in my own skin. The real breaking point came during a family dinner 3 months into our engagement. Rebecca and Thomas were present, as were my maternal grandparents who had flown in from Florida. The conversation turned to wedding dates, and my mother casually mentioned June of the following year. "Actually," I corrected, "Jason and I have already put a deposit down for this coming June. We've booked lakeside gardens." A silence fell over the table. My father set down his fork with deliberate precision. "Natalie," he said in his courtroom voice, "your mother and I have discussed this. It's simply not appropriate for the younger sister to marry before the older one. It's not traditional." I looked to Rebecca in disbelief. "Do you and Thomas even have plans to get engaged?" Rebecca shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "Well, not immediately," she admitted. "We're focusing on our careers right now. So, I'm supposed to put my life on hold indefinitely because you're not ready?" The words came out sharper than intended, causing my grandmother to nervously dab at her lips with her napkin. "It's not about putting your life on hold," my mother interjected smoothly. "It's about proper timing and family considerations. I'm sure Jason understands the importance of traditions." Jason, who had been quietly observing, finally spoke. "With all due respect, Mrs. Bennet, I think the only tradition that matters is two people who love each other making a commitment. Natalie and I aren't willing to postpone our life together for an arbitrary rule." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. My father's face hardened as he turned to me. "If you insist on rushing into this, that's your choice. But perhaps you should consider the financial implications. Weddings are expensive, and your mother and I had budgeted for Rebecca's to come first." 2 days later, my mother called with what she framed as a compromise. They would double our wedding budget if we agreed to postpone for just 1 year. "Think of what you could do with those extra funds, darling. A nicer venue, better photographer, maybe even a honeymoon in Europe instead of that camping trip you mentioned." The offer was tempting, not for the material upgrades, but because it represented a potential path to parental approval. That evening, I discussed it with Jason, who listened thoughtfully before asking a simple question. Would postponing make us happier, or would it just please your parents? The answer crystallized something I'd been feeling for months. "It would just please my parents," I admitted. "And even then, probably not entirely." The next day, I called my mother and declined her offer. "We're keeping our June date," I told her firmly. "I hope you and Dad will support our decision." Her sighs spoke volumes. "I'll discuss it with your father." A week of tense silence followed. Then, on a crisp October evening, my phone rang with my father's number. Hope fluttered briefly in my chest. Perhaps they'd reconsidered. "Natalie," he began without preamble, his voice unnervingly formal. "Your mother and I have given this considerable thought. If you refuse to reconsider the timing of this wedding, we won't be able to attend." The words hit like a physical blow. "You're boycotting my wedding because I won't wait for Rebecca to get engaged?" "I wouldn't phrase it that way," he replied stiffly. "We're simply unable to support a decision that disregards family tradition and proper order. Perhaps this is a valuable lesson in considering how your choices affect others." After hanging up, I sat motionless on our sofa, phone still clutched in my hand. When Jason arrived home and found me there, he didn't need an explanation. He simply held me as years of accumulated hurt poured out in racking sobs. That night, between tears, we had the most honest conversation of our relationship. We discussed postponing one final time, weighing the pain of parental absence against the principle at stake. By morning, our resolve had solidified. We would proceed with our plans, with or without my family's blessing. Rebecca called the next day, clearly distressed. I told them they're being ridiculous, she said, her voice uncharacteristically heated. I tried to explain that I don't care about marrying first, but they won't listen. Will you still come? I asked, hating the vulnerability in my voice. Her hesitation told me everything. I want to, Nat. I really do. But it's complicated. I'll try, I promise. As word spread about my parents' decision, something unexpected happened. Friends rallied around us with overwhelming support. Allison, my college roommate, flew in from Chicago to help with planning. Jason's parents, whom I'd only met twice before, called daily with encouragement and practical assistance. His mother Judith insisted on helping me shop for a new dress after I abandoned the selections my mother had pushed. A wedding dress should make you feel like yourself, just on the most special day of your life, she told me as I twirled in a flowing, bohemian gown that felt like it had been made for me. The tears in her eyes as she hugged me provided a glimpse of what maternal support could feel like. As June approached, I made one final attempt at reconciliation. I mailed handwritten invitations to my parents and Rebecca, despite having received no response to the formal ones sent months earlier. I included a note telling them I loved them and would save them seats until the last minute. The invitations were returned unopened, marked "Address Unknown," in my father's unmistakable handwriting. I woke before dawn on my wedding day, a kaleidoscope of emotions swirling through me. Excitement about marrying Jason mingled with a hollow ache where family joy should have been. Sunlight streamed through the curtains of the hotel suite I'd shared with my bridesmaids, illuminating their sleeping forms. These women, college friends, co-workers, and Jason's sister Melissa, had surrounded me with more love and support over the past months than I'd experienced in years of family dinners. Slipping quietly onto the balcony with a cup of tea, I watched the sun rise over lakeside gardens. The venue looked magical in the morning light, with dew glistening on the grass where our ceremony would take place in just a few hours. Despite everything, a sense of peace settled over me. This day belonged to Jason and me, no one else. My phone chimed with a text message, and my heart leapt. For one irrational moment, I thought it might be my mother, having had a last-minute change of heart. Instead, it was Judith, Jason's mom. "Good morning, beautiful bride. Jim and I are already up and so excited for today. Can't wait to see you shine." Those simple words brought tears to my eyes, happy ones this time. When Allison stirred and joined me on the balcony, she immediately noticed. "You okay, sweetie?" she asked, wrapping an arm around my shoulders. "Better than okay," I replied, realizing it was true. "I'm getting married today." The morning passed in a blur of activity. The hairstylist created soft waves that framed my face, while the makeup artist enhanced my features without making me feel like someone else. When I slipped into my dress, the bohemian gown with delicate lace detailing, a collective sigh went up from the women in the room. "You look absolutely beautiful," Melissa said, adjusting my flower crown. "My brother's going to lose his mind when he sees you." As the final preparations were underway, my phone rang. I froze, staring at the screen. An unknown number. "Hello." I answered, barely breathing. "Natalie? It's me, Rebecca." Her voice sounded strained. "I just wanted to say, I'm thinking of you today. I'm so sorry I can't be there." The disappointment was crushing. "You promised you'd try." "I know. I did try. But Dad threatened to cut me off completely if I attended, and Mom hasn't stopped crying for days. I can't." After we hung up, I allowed myself exactly 3 minutes of grief, staring at the family photo on my phone, taken years ago when I still believed I might someday earn their approval. Then, with deliberate movements, I deleted the picture, touched up my makeup, and rejoined my bridesmaids. "Ready?" Allison asked, studying my face with concern. Absolutely ready, I replied, and was surprised to find I meant it. The ceremony was scheduled for 4 o'clock. At 3:30, I stood in the bridal suite overlooking the garden where rows of white chairs were arranged in a semicircle. My eyes were drawn inevitably to the front row, where 2 seats remained conspicuously empty despite the otherwise full venue. Jim, Jason's father, knocked gently on the door. "It's time, sweetheart," he said, his kind eyes crinkling at the corners. "Jason's waiting, and he looks almost as nervous as the day he asked us for your grandmother's ring." We'd discussed the processional at length after my father's refusal to attend. I'd considered walking alone, having Jim escort me, or even having the entire bridal party enter together. In the end, I'd chosen to walk by myself, not as a statement of abandonment, but of independence. As the music began and my bridesmaids processed one by one, I took deep, centering breaths. When the wedding coordinator signaled it was my turn, I stepped into the sunlight alone, clutching my bouquet of wildflowers. The gathered friends and family rose, turning to watch my entrance. For a heartbeat, I faltered, the empty front row seats momentarily stealing my resolve. Then I saw Jason, standing tall at the altar, his eyes finding mine with such love and certainty that everything else receded. Each step toward him felt like moving into a future I'd chosen for myself, one step further from the shadows of never being enough. Halfway down the aisle, I noticed movement at the back of the gathering. A late arrival slipping into the last row. Rebecca, wearing large sunglasses and a scarf partially covering her hair. Our eyes met briefly, and she gave a small, encouraging nod. When I reached Jason, he leaned close and whispered, "You are the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." His hands were steady as they took mine, a contrast to the slight tremor in my fingers. The ceremony itself was everything we'd wanted, personal, authentic, and focused on our commitment rather than pageantry. We'd written our own vows, and when Jason spoke of choosing each other every day, especially on the hard days, I felt the words resonate through my core. My vows included a line about finding home in each other when other shelters fail, which caused a ripple of knowing murmurs among guests familiar with our situation. After the officiant pronounced us husband and wife, we walked back down the aisle together to the sound of joyful music and scattered applause. I deliberately didn't look at the empty front row seats, focusing instead on the faces of those who had chosen to celebrate with us. At the reception, I searched for Rebecca, but she had already disappeared, present just long enough to witness our vows before slipping away. The reception tent glowed with string lights and candles, creating the intimate, magical atmosphere we'd envisioned. During the father-daughter dance, Jason's dad stepped in without fanfare, treating me with such genuine affection that several guests were moved to tears. "Your family now," he whispered as we swayed to the music. No conditions, no expectations, just love. Later, as Jason and I took to the floor for our first dance, I felt something shift inside me. The space that had been hollowed out by years of conditional love and impossible standards began to fill with something new, a sense of possibility unburdened by the weight of approval-seeking. When Jason dipped me dramatically at the song's end, causing our guests to cheer, I laughed with complete abandon. As the night progressed, there were moments when the absence of my family briefly pierced through the joy, when toasts were given and no one spoke of my childhood, when family photos were arranged and the groupings felt lopsided. Yet there were also unexpected moments of grace. Jason's extended family embraced me with enthusiastic hugs and stories that welcomed me into their history. Friends from every chapter of my life mingled together, creating a tapestry of connection that felt like something sacred. Near midnight, as the celebration began to wind down, I stepped outside the tent for a moment of quiet reflection. The moon cast silver light across the lake, and in that peaceful moment, I realized something profound. I had spent my entire life measuring my worth against an impossible standard, believing that family approval was the ultimate validation. Standing there as Natalie Montgomery, I finally understood that validation had always been mine to give myself. When Jason found me a few minutes later, I was smiling through tears. Having regrets? He asked softly, draping his jacket around my shoulders. The opposite, I replied, leaning into his embrace. I'm just realizing that sometimes the family you're born into isn't the family that helps you become who you're meant to be. We left for our honeymoon the next morning, not the European tour my mother had suggested, but a 2-week adventure through the national parks of Utah and Arizona. Under vast desert skies, sleeping in a tent beneath stars too numerous to count, I felt a freedom I'd never known before. Each day of hiking, exploring, and simply being together further dissolved the remnants of who I'd been trained to be, revealing instead who I actually was. On our last night, sitting beside a campfire at the Grand Canyon's edge, Jason asked if I had any regrets about how our wedding had unfolded. Just one, I admitted. That I spent so many years believing I needed their approval to be happy. Returning from our honeymoon to our small but charming apartment in Cambridge felt like stepping into a new reality. Mail had accumulated, including a postcard from Rebecca with a brief message. It was beautiful. You were beautiful. I'm sorry I couldn't stay. No mention of our parents or why she'd risked attending at all. The first week back, I called my parents home, heart pounding as the phone rang. When my mother answered with her crisp Bennett residence, I nearly lost my nerve. Mom, it's Natalie, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. We're back from our honeymoon. The silence stretched for several seconds before she responded, her tone formal and distant. I see. I trust you had a pleasant trip. It was wonderful, I replied, pushing through the awkwardness. I was hoping maybe we could have lunch soon. Just to talk. I don't think that would be appropriate right now, Natalie. Your father is still very upset about your choices. My choice to marry the man I love? I couldn't keep the edge from my voice. Your choice to disregard family traditions and expectations, she corrected. Actions have consequences. The conversation ended shortly after, leaving me with a familiar hollow feeling. Jason found me staring at the phone and didn't need to ask how the call had gone. Instead, he suggested we focus on making our first apartment together feel like home, a project that became unexpectedly healing. Over the next few weeks, Rebecca and I established a pattern of secret lunch meetings. She would text from different numbers, suggesting locations far from our parents' usual haunts. During these furtive gatherings, she shared snippets of information about our parents' narrative. They're telling everyone you eloped, she revealed during our second lunch. Mom told the Harringtons that you refused to include family in your planning and decided to do things your own way. She makes it sound like you ran off to Vegas or something. That's ridiculous, I said, stabbing at my salad. They were invited every step of the way. They chose not to come. Rebecca looked uncomfortable. I know, but they've convinced themselves and most of their friends that you were being rebellious and disrespectful. Through these conversations, I discovered that my parents had created an entirely different reality, one where they were the reasonable, traditional parents and I was the ungrateful daughter who had turned my back on family values. What hurt most wasn't the lie itself, but how easily their social circle had accepted it without question. As summer faded into fall, Jason and I settled into married life. We established new routines and traditions, finding joy in simple pleasures like Sunday morning coffee on our tiny balcony or weeknight cooking adventures. His parents visited regularly, bringing warmth and genuine interest in our lives. His mother, Judith, and I developed a particularly close relationship, spending hours discussing art and life during her visits. You know, she told me one afternoon as we walked through a local gallery, when Jason first told us about your family situation, I couldn't understand it. Now that I know you, I'm even more baffled. They're missing out on knowing an extraordinary woman. Thanksgiving loomed as our first major holiday as a married couple. After much discussion, we decided to host, inviting friends who didn't have local family along with Jason's parents. The empty chair I'd unconsciously set at the table, a habit from visualizing a reconciliation, stood as a poignant reminder of ongoing absence. Christmas brought a more pointed reminder when my carefully selected card and gift to my parents were returned, the envelope marked, "Address unknown," just as our wedding invitation had been. Rebecca accepted her gift from us when we met secretly for coffee, but admitted she couldn't bring anything in return because our parents monitored her expenses and would question any gift for me. "They go through your expenses?" Jason asked, clearly disturbed. "Rebecca, you're 28 years old." She shrugged, a gesture that spoke volumes about normalized control. "They help with my condo payments, so they feel entitled to know where my money goes. It's just how they are." In January, I made my second attempt at reconciliation, sending a handwritten letter detailing our lives and expressing hope for healing. When a month passed without response, I channeled my disappointment into work, accepting a position teaching advanced art classes at a prestigious community college while continuing my personal projects. Early spring brought unexpected recognition when a local arts magazine featured my mural work in a spread about emerging Boston artists. The day the issue was published, I received a text from Rebecca with a screenshot of the article and a simple message. "They saw this." Dad went silent. Mom changed the subject. It wasn't much, but it was the first confirmation that they were at least peripherally aware of my continuing existence. April marked our first wedding anniversary, which we celebrated with a weekend trip to the White Mountains where Jason had proposed. Standing on the same overlook, now as husband and wife, I realized how much stronger I'd become. The constant ache of parental rejection hadn't disappeared, but it had transformed into something more manageable, a dull throb rather than a sharp pain. "I used to think I needed their approval to feel complete," I told Jason as we watched the sunset. "Now I understand that their approval was always conditional on being someone I'm not." In May, I made my third attempt at bridge building, calling my parents home on their anniversary. When my father answered, his voice immediately cooled upon recognizing mine. "We're about to leave for dinner, Natalie. This isn't a good time." "I just wanted to wish you and Mom a happy anniversary," I persisted. "And to let you know that if you ever want to talk, my door is always open." His response was clipped. "Your mother and I have made our position clear. Until you acknowledge the disruption your hasty marriage has caused, I don't see what we have to discuss." The futility of these attempts finally convinced me to seek professional help. Finding a therapist who specialized in family estrangement was a turning point. Dr. Marissa Hopkins helped me understand that my parents' behavior reflected their own rigid worldview rather than any actual failing on my part. "What you're describing sounds like conditional love," she explained during one session. "They love the version of you that fits their narrative, not necessarily the person you actually are." Those therapy sessions became a lifeline as I worked through years of accumulated pain. Jason attended some sessions with me, gaining insights into patterns I hadn't even recognized. His unwavering support never faltered, even when processing my family trauma meant late-night crying jags or days of quiet withdrawal. Summer brought another surprise. During a routine checkup, I discovered I was pregnant. The joy of impending parenthood was immediately complicated by thoughts of my estranged family. Would having a grandchild change anything? Should I even tell them? After much soul-searching and discussion with Jason, I decided to share the news with Rebecca first. Her reaction was enthusiastic, but tinged with anxiety. "They'll have to come around now," she said hopefully over brunch. "No one turns their back on their own grandchild." I wasn't so certain. "I don't want our baby used as a reconciliation tool," I told her firmly. "If they want to be grandparents, they need to be parents first." Rebecca reluctantly agreed to let me tell them in my own way, which I did through another letter, this one announcing the pregnancy and due date, along with an invitation to reconnect if they wished to be part of their grandchild's life. When no response came, I made the difficult decision to stop expecting one. The baby shower, organized by Allison and Melissa, was a celebration filled with genuine joy and excitement. The absence of my mother was still felt, an empty space where generational wisdom and maternal guidance should have been. Yet Judith stepped in with gentle support, sharing stories of Jason's infancy and offering practical advice without overstepping. "Becoming a mother changes everything," she told me as she helped arrange gifts afterward. "It makes you reevaluate what really matters." Her words proved prophetic in ways I couldn't have anticipated. As my pregnancy progressed and Jason and I prepared for parenthood, my perspective on the estrangement shifted. The child growing inside me deserved a mother who was whole and healthy, not one still crippled by seeking approval she might never receive. With fall's arrival, I threw myself into creating a nursery in our apartment. Each decision, from the color of the walls to the handmade mobile above the crib, became an affirmation of the family we were creating. A family built on acceptance, support, and unconditional love. Everything I had lacked growing up. Rebecca visited often during this time, bringing small gifts for the baby and updates that revealed cracks forming in our parents' perfect facade. Mom cried when Mrs. Abernathy asked about you at their fundraiser, she confided. And Dad changed his usual golf time to avoid Mr. Wilson asking about becoming a grandfather. These small signs of discomfort gave me no pleasure. I didn't want my parents to suffer. I simply wanted them to recognize that family love shouldn't come with prerequisites. As my due date approached, I realized something fundamental was changing within me. The desperate need for their approval was being replaced by something stronger, a determination to break generational patterns and create a different kind of family for my child. Rebecca's phone call came on a crisp October afternoon as I was folding tiny onesies for my baby's arrival. Her voice trembled with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. "I'm engaged," she blurted without preamble. But not to Thomas. The story spilled out in disjointed pieces. She'd broken up with Thomas 6 months earlier, but had kept it from her parents. She'd reconnected with Kyle, a musician she'd dated briefly in college before her parents had expressed their disapproval of his unstable career prospects. They'd been seeing each other secretly, and he'd proposed the previous weekend. "He's touring with the Boston Symphony Orchestra now," she explained. "Still not a surgeon, but hardly a starving artist." "Are you happy?" I asked, focusing on what truly mattered. "Happier than I've ever been," she admitted, but terrified to tell Mom and Dad. 2 days later, she called again, this time in tears. She'd told our parents, and their reaction had been predictably controlling. Mother had immediately started planning an elaborate summer wedding at the Westbrook Club, the venue she'd tried to push on me. Father had made thinly veiled comments about Kyle's suitability and suggested a lengthy engagement to be certain. "They're doing exactly what they did with you," Rebecca said, her voice hoarse from crying. "Trying to control everything, insisting on their timeline and their vision. I finally understand how suffocating it feels." A week later, Rebecca joined Jason and me for dinner, bringing Kyle to meet us for the first time. He was thoughtful and articulate, with a passion for classical composition that lit up his face when he discussed it. Watching Rebecca with him, relaxed, authentic, laughing freely, I saw a version of my sister I barely recognized. "Your parents have invited us to dinner tomorrow night," Kyle mentioned as we shared dessert. "Rebecca's been preparing me with etiquette lessons." His tone was light, but I caught the underlying anxiety. The dinner, by Rebecca's subsequent report, was a disaster. Mother had interrogated Kyle about his 5-year career plan and retirement savings, while Father had repeatedly mentioned Thomas's recent promotion at Mass General Hospital. When Kyle politely but firmly stated that he and Rebecca were planning a small wedding in the spring, not the summer extravaganza our mother envisioned, the tension had escalated dramatically. "Your sister made the same impulsive decision," our father had apparently said. And look how that turned out. That comment had been the breaking point. For the first time in her life, Rebecca had openly challenged our parents, defending both my choices and her own right to make decisions about her life. The argument that followed had been overheard by several diners at the country club, including the Petersons, longtime friends of my parents who had immediately reported the incident to their extensive social circle. Within days, cracks began appearing in my parents' carefully constructed image. Rebecca forwarded me messages from family friends expressing concern about the situation with the Bennett girls. Several of Mother's social acquaintances reached out to me directly, offering support that suggested they'd long seen through the perfect family facade. The situation escalated when Rebecca posted a heartfelt statement on social media. "Family isn't about control or perfection. It's about love and acceptance. Sometimes standing up for yourself means disappointing people who aren't ready to see you as you really are." Though she hadn't explicitly mentioned our parents, the timing and content made the reference clear to anyone familiar with the situation. The post went locally viral, shared by mutual acquaintances and commented on by surprised members of our parents' social circle. By addressing the elephant in the room, Rebecca had broken the code of silence that had protected my parents' reputation for years. My phone began ringing with calls from extended family members who had maintained distance during my estrangement. My Aunt Catherine, my father's sister, who had always been something of a family rebel herself, called to express her support. "I tried to talk sense into Richard when he refused to attend your wedding," she confided. "But you know your father. Once his mind is made up, it's like arguing with a brick wall. For what it's worth, I always thought he and Linda were far too rigid with you girls." The social fallout intensified when Rebecca and Kyle moved into an apartment in my neighborhood, a clear statement of alliance. We began hosting weekly sister dinners, building the relationship we'd never been allowed to have under our parents' watchful eyes. During these evenings, Rebecca shared more about the cracks appearing in our parents' social standing. Mom was uninvited from the hospital charity committee, she revealed one night. Apparently, Mrs. Whitfield said they needed members who understood the importance of family bonds. Dad's law partner pulled him aside to suggest that the firm's image might suffer if rumors about family estrangement continued. While I took no pleasure in my parents' social discomfort, there was something vindicating about the community finally seeing beyond the perfect facade. The rigid rules and conditional approval that had shaped my childhood were being recognized for what they were, not traditional values, but controlling behavior dressed up as propriety. As Christmas approached, Rebecca faced her own version of the holiday dilemma I'd navigated the previous year. After much discussion, we decided to host a joint celebration at my apartment, inviting Jason's family and several mutual friends. The evening was filled with genuine warmth and laughter, so different from the formal, tense holiday gatherings of our childhood. "Is this what normal family feels like?" Rebecca asked as we washed dishes afterward, Kyle and Jason deep in conversation about jazz in the living room. "I think it's what chosen family feels like," I corrected gently. "People who love you for exactly who you are." January brought another blow to my parents' social standing when they were seated at a less prestigious table at the annual Winter Charity Ball, an event where they had always held court at the head table. According to Rebecca's friend who attended, our mother had been visibly distressed by the snub, while our father had maintained a rigid smile throughout the evening. The final crack in their facade came in February, when my father's law firm announced partnership changes that effectively reduced his decision-making power. Though positioned as a strategic restructuring, the timing suggested a connection to the family drama that had become common knowledge in their social circle. A week after this announcement, I received a text message from an unknown number. The content was brief. "This is your mother. We should talk." After consulting with Jason and my therapist, I agreed to meet her at a neutral location, a quiet cafe halfway between our homes. She arrived looking impeccable as always, though I noticed new lines around her eyes and a certain tension in her movements. We exchanged awkward greetings before she came to the point with uncharacteristic directness. "This situation has gone on long enough," she stated, stirring her untouched tea. "People are talking, and it's affecting your father's position at the firm." I took a deep breath, centering myself before responding. "I'm not responsible for other people's reactions to choices you and Dad made. You and Rebecca both deliberately defied family expectations," she countered, a familiar note of disapproval entering her voice. "Actions have consequences." "Yes, they do," I agreed calmly, "including the consequence of choosing your social standing over relationship with your daughter and soon-to-be grandchild." Something flickered across her face, perhaps the first recognition that her carefully constructed world had permanently shifted. "We may have been rigid in our expectations," she conceded reluctantly, "but family appearances matter, Natalie." "Not as much as family love," I replied. "I'm willing to work toward reconciliation, but not if it means pretending the hurt never happened or returning to old patterns." We parted without concrete resolution, but the meeting itself represented a hairline fracture in the wall that had been built between us. As I watched her walk to her car, back straight and head held high despite everything, I felt an unexpected wave of compassion. My mother, for all her flaws, was also a product of rigid expectations and conditional approval. Understanding this didn't excuse her behavior, but it helped me see her as a complex human rather than simply the architect of my insecurities. Later that week, Rebecca called with news that our father had reached out to Kyle directly, inviting him to lunch. It was weird and formal, she reported after Kyle returned from the meeting. But Dad actually listened when Kyle talked about his career. He even asked questions about the symphony schedule. These small gestures toward reconciliation might have seemed insignificant to outsiders, but to Rebecca and me, they represented seismic shifts in our family dynamics. The perfect family image had crumbled under the weight of its own rigidity, creating space for something potentially more authentic to emerge from the rubble. My water broke 3 weeks before my due date, sending Jason and me rushing to the hospital in the pre-dawn hours. Between contractions, I called Rebecca, who promised to be there as soon as possible. The labor progressed rapidly, leaving no time for the carefully planned birthing techniques we'd practiced. Instead, I found myself relying on instinct and Jason's steady presence as my body worked to bring our child into the world. Catherine Judith Montgomery arrived at 10:43 a.m., announcing herself with a strong, indignant cry that made both Jason and me laugh through tears. When the nurse placed her tiny form on my chest, time seemed to stop. Her perfect fingers, the delicate curve of her ear, the surprising strength of her grip around my finger, each detail imprinted itself on my heart with permanent ink. "She's beautiful," Jason whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Just like her mother." Rebecca arrived shortly after, bearing flowers and a tiny stuffed rabbit. When she held Catherine for the first time, the tenderness in her expression made me realize how much our relationship had healed over the past months. "I texted Mom," she admitted hesitantly, "just to let her know the baby arrived safely. I hope that's okay." I nodded, too exhausted and joy-filled to worry about potential complications. "It's okay. They should know they have a granddaughter, even if they choose not to meet her." No response came from our parents during our 3-day hospital stay or the first week at home. I tried to focus on the miracle of Catherine rather than the persistent ache of their absence. Jason's parents arrived to help, filling our apartment with practical support and genuine love that eased the transition to parenthood. 2 weeks after Catherine's birth, as I was settling into the rhythms of feeding and diaper changes, my phone rang with my mother's number. With sleeping Catherine cradled against my chest, I answered cautiously. "Natalie?" My mother's voice sounded uncertain, lacking its usual authoritative tone. "Rebecca sent us a picture of the baby. She looks healthy." "She is," I confirmed, keeping my voice neutral. "Catherine Judith. 7 pounds, 3 ounces. A pause. "That's a lovely name." Another pause. "I was wondering, that is, your father and I were discussing perhaps we might visit?" "Just briefly, to meet her." The request was delivered with uncharacteristic hesitation, so different from the confident pronouncements that had defined my childhood. After consulting with Jason, we agreed to a short visit the following Sunday afternoon. They arrived exactly on time, bearing an elaborately wrapped gift and expressions of careful neutrality. My father stood awkwardly in our modest living room, taking in the art on our walls and the baby items scattered across furniture. My mother moved with unnatural stiffness, as though afraid to disturb the fragile peace. When I placed Catherine in my mother's arms, something shifted in her carefully composed expression. For a brief moment, I glimpsed the woman beneath the socialite facade, someone capable of simple joy and genuine connection. My father maintained his distance initially, but curiosity eventually drew him closer, one finger tentatively touching Catherine's tiny hand. "She has the Bennett nose," he observed, the first personal comment he directed to me in nearly 2 years. The visit lasted exactly the planned hour, concluding with stilted goodbyes and no definite plans for future contact. It wasn't the warm reconciliation of movie endings, but it was a beginning. A small crack in the wall that had separated us. 2 months later, Rebecca and Kyle held their wedding at a charming historic inn in Vermont. The intimate ceremony reflected their personalities perfectly, elegant but relaxed, traditional yet creative. My parents attended, maintaining polite formality throughout most of the event. As mother of the bride, my mother had clearly struggled with her diminished role in the planning process. Yet when the moment came for family photographs, she stood beside Rebecca without commentary on the venue or arrangements, a restraint that represented significant growth. During the reception, I found myself alone with my father at the bar, an uncomfortable silence stretching between us. After ordering his scotch, he turned to me with an expression I couldn't quite interpret. "Catherine seems to be thriving," he commented, his tone carefully neutral. "She is," I agreed. "She's starting to smile now. Real smiles, not just gas." His lips twitched slightly. "Bennett babies are always alert. You are the same way, observing everything at just a few months old." It was the first personal memory he had shared since our estrangement, a tiny bridge across the chasm between us. We didn't address the underlying issues that evening, but something fundamental had shifted in our dynamic. Catherine's first birthday party became the testing ground for our evolving family relationship. We hosted a small gathering at our apartment, inviting close friends and family, including my parents. Their attendance was brief and somewhat awkward, but the simple fact of their presence represented progress. My mother brought an elaborately decorated cake from an expensive bakery, though she seemed flustered when Catherine preferred the homemade cupcakes Jason's mother had baked. My father presented a savings bond certificate with solemn formality, clearly more comfortable with financial expressions of affection than emotional ones. As they prepared to leave, my mother hesitated by the door. "She's a lovely child, Natalie. You're doing a good job with her." Coming from her, this qualified as effusive praise. I accepted it with a simple "thank you," recognizing the effort it had taken for her to offer even this moderate approval. The weekly sister dinners that Rebecca and I had established became a cornerstone of my emotional support system. Over pasta and wine, we processed our ongoing journey toward healthier family dynamics, celebrating small victories and supporting each other through setbacks. "They're trying," Rebecca observed one evening, 6 months after Catherine's birthday. "In their own limited way, they're actually trying." "They are," I agreed. "But I'm not waiting for their approval anymore. That's the difference. I can appreciate their efforts without needing them to validate my choices." This fundamental shift in perspective had been my most significant healing. The desperate need for parental approval that had defined my early life had been replaced by a healthier self-validation. I could maintain boundaries while still leaving space for my parents to evolve at their own pace. As Catherine grew into a toddler, my relationship with my parents settled into a cautious détente. We exchanged holiday cards and attended occasional family gatherings. They remained formal and somewhat distant, particularly my father, but the open hostility had dissolved into something more like resigned acceptance. My mother occasionally asked to take Catherine shopping or to the Children's Museum, outings I permitted with clear time boundaries. During these interactions, I sometimes glimpsed the grandmother she might have been in another reality, one where rigid expectations hadn't constructed so many barriers. 2 years after Catherine's birth, when I announced my pregnancy with our second child, my parents' response was notably warmer than their reaction to my first pregnancy. My mother actually offered to host a small family dinner to celebrate the news, an olive branch I accepted with cautious optimism. The healing wasn't perfect or complete. Certain topics remained off-limits, and I maintained careful boundaries around my parents' involvement in our lives. Yet there was progress, small, imperfect steps toward a more authentic relationship. Looking back on the journey from my wedding day to where we stood now, I recognized how fundamentally my perspective had shifted. The crumbling of my parents' perfect family image hadn't given me the vindication I might once have expected. Instead, it had created space for something more real to emerge, relationships based on who we actually were rather than who we were expected to be. The greatest gift of this painful journey was the clarity it had given me about the kind of parent I wanted to be. Each day with Catherine reinforced my commitment to unconditional love, to seeing and celebrating her authentic self rather than any projection of my expectations. When she frustrated me with typical toddler stubbornness, I reminded myself that her strong will was something to nurture rather than suppress, a strength that would serve her well in adulthood. The family dynamics I'd grown up with had been rooted in rigid control and conditional approval. The family Jason and I were creating operated on entirely different principles: acceptance, authenticity, and the freedom to grow into ourselves. Breaking generational patterns wasn't easy, but watching Catherine flourish under this different approach confirmed we were on the right path. One evening, as Jason and I watched Catherine constructing an elaborate block tower with fierce concentration, he squeezed my hand gently. "You know what I just realized?" he said. "Your parents' perfect family image had to crumble for a real family to grow in its place." His observation captured the essence of our journey perfectly. Sometimes structures need to fall for something more authentic to be built. The painful collapse of family illusions had ultimately created space for genuine connection, imperfect, sometimes awkward, but rooted in reality rather than appearances. Have you ever had to choose between family expectations and your own happiness? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this journey of breaking free from the need for approval resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe for more stories about finding your authentic path. Remember, sometimes the family we create is more important than the family we were born into. Thank you for listening, and I wish you the courage to stand in your own truth, whatever that may be.